That title is pretty rough, I know, but I think there's some real issues with the no value for life rule in GTARP, and it has nothing to do with the intent of the rule or the fact that it exists. Now, if that sounds a little contradictory and doesn't quite add up to you, let me explain. If you're unfamiliar with GTARP, the NVL or no value for life rule is the rule. There's, in my opinion, three big rules that constitute the makeup of an RP server's DNA, and NVL is probably at the top. The explanation of it being pretty simple. Don't do anything with your character that could reasonably put your character in significant danger of losing their life. Pretty simple, right? And again, I think it's an important and integral part of what separates GTARP from GTA Online. It's what allows for the amazing content that most of us have seen and cleans up the messy, repetitive, and frustrating parts of regular GTA Online. In essence, it is what makes GTARP roleplay. You might be asking yourself then, if you got such a hard-on for this rule, then what's the problem? I'll be showing you a few servers' interpretation of the rule, and hopefully in seeing a few different takes on it, you may begin to see where the problems come in. And it's mostly, if not wholly, in its interpretation and implementation on a range of servers. In a vacuum, NVL is a perfectly good rule, but nothing exists in a vacuum, and NVL as a rule really only begins to become an issue when paired with the other core rules that make up RP servers. And those are power gaming and metagaming. I mentioned the three big rules that make up the DNA of a GTA roleplay server. Power and metagaming are the other two rules, and NVL makes three. Power gaming is the use of game and roleplay mechanics or bugs to attain an advantage in interactions. But it's expanded and is not only to gain an advantage for yourself, it can also be keeping another player in a situation with no way to interact within it. Metagaming you might be more familiar with as a term, but in RP, simply put, it's the use of information that your character did not attain. When all three rules are in balance, in my opinion, you have the space to create a thriving roleplay community full of cooperative stories. You've not only removed the senseless repetitive killing with the NVL rule, but you've also created authentic organic interactions with the power and metagaming rules. I think one of the largest problems within the RP community right now is that there's an imbalance in these rules, and it comes down to implementation and enforcement of them. NVL is by far the most enforced, without much consideration for power or metagaming, to the point that anytime someone has a gun out in an interaction, they have complete control over another individual for however long they deem fit. This seems reasonable on the surface. Someone's got a gun to you, you'll do what they say. Until you really realize the frequency at which people have guns out. Everyone has a story. Someone was driving by with a gun out, shouting demands at speed on the highway. There was someone who reacted to a minor insult by escalating straight to a gun. Any interesting or even viably realistic response to these scenarios being punished under NVL. In any scenario, having a weapon first lets you control the entire interaction. Any reaction other than the one expressly given by the person with their gun out first is considered no value for life. I would argue that the knowledge of the NVL rule and having a gun in your hands as quickly and as often as possible is a complete abuse of an RP mechanic and is by definition a breach of both power and metagaming rules. However, when enforcing these rules, multiple staff teams seem to enforce NVL first and foremost, power and metagaming considerations rarely being made. These rules are meant to be in a balance, but when enforcement mainly considers only one of these three rules, the typical and intended result of the NVL rule gets flipped on its head. Senseless violence and repetitive killing runs rampant, the only twist being that instead of everyone killing everyone, the more GTA Online behavior of constantly having a gun out permits you further GTA Online behavior, granting you the power to kill anyone who contests you, verbally or otherwise. I'd like to dig into the example of having a gun out a little bit deeper to show how the effects of poor implementation and enforcement of NVL spread far beyond a few bad interactions, and actually effectively alters the DNA of an entire server. For that, I'd like to bring cops into the mix. Cops in jail are a role and mechanic respectively, meant to simulate the severity and weight of holding a weapon in your hands. If you've actually ever held a gun in your hands and you've been educated properly on firearms, you feel that responsibility. You hold an incredibly destructive tool and understand what that means. But GTA, and no matter how passionate you are, even GTA RP is a game. So to simulate that, cops and laws are brought into servers to help simulate the responsibility that you may not be able to bring to your character naturally when you're pointing a non-deadly pixel version of a firearm at another character. However, due to the NVL rule and how quickly and broadly implemented it is, you create a rock, paper, scissors game that criminals end out on top of most of the time. Civilians have to consider any criminal implications that could come from pulling a gun out. Cops have to consider the use of force when drawing their weapon. But criminals are unique in this game. They don't have either of those considerations that they need to make by character design alone. Any consideration made from having a weapon out is self-imposed. If you have a newer RPer or someone that doesn't have the forethought in the character creation process to make these self-imposed considerations, they come to the realization that most kids do when playing rock, paper, scissors. And that's that gun will win the game, because they aren't playing the same game. However, because NVL is the gold standard in RP, there's no one to step in and explain that if you bring an option to rock, paper, scissors that's outside of these options, the game is less fun for anyone you play. Nobody is there to explain the simple rules to you. This creates a game where, sure, you'll win every game, but eventually nobody will want to play with you anymore. A phenomena that you'll see in many servers without big streamers propping up the community or name value of that server. My solution to this problem is not going to be a popular one, and I don't expect it to be the best and most comprehensive solution. It's just a point that I think we can all start from. It was brought up to me while writing this that the underlying theme that underpins this whole piece is that rules have consequences. And through current iteration and implementation, the balance of consequence to rule break isn't equal. From that, the solution that I have is for there to be more consequences for characters. Punish the character and their choices, and spare the player. A new standard in RP that even the big servers like NoPixel, Onyx, and Purple aren't free from is greatly reduced prison sentences. In many cases, this has been a good thing. There's no need for a small, non-violent crime to be punished with an hour or more of RP purgatory, but prison is an invaluable RP mechanic that hasn't gotten much love in the past few years. Cops spend more time on an arrest report than criminals actually spend in prison for the crime on that report. Shorter prison sentences can be really beneficial for petty crime, but the reach of these shorter times have been sweeping and touch all crime, violent or not, large or not. So to continue, large and or violent crime should come with severe consequences. Prison sentences for these character choices should be measured in hours, not minutes. Because while most scream realism at the top of their lungs, or servers pasting serious RP in their banners, the amount of violent felons turned free to enact more violence in the world is not realistic. And characters that repeatedly harm others or pull off large-scale heists every few hours or even every day isn't serious. To expand on this, I challenge others as I am going to try to challenge myself to be less attached to your characters and their stories. And that's not to say don't invest the time or energy that you have been, because that's what makes these characters beautiful. But if we want to put weight on actions, we can help to do so through the dreaded and sadly underused perma. Getting older has taught me that death comes often and is more often than not nonsensical. Stories rarely end in a tied, neat little bow, and few ride off into the sunset victorious. Murder in RP has no consequence and no feeling of consequence, but we can help bring at least a feeling of consequence on our own. By letting our characters' time be their time. Enjoy what was and move on. It's daunting to start over, but you also get to find out new things you never expected from that carefully made character. It's something I've admittedly struggled with too. But in addition to this conversation starter to help fix the problem, I'll be looking more actively to perma again. Not on every down, but when it feels appropriate to the situation. Taking my character's own story into consideration a lot less. Because the stories that get retold and remembered are the ones that never get their perfect ending. In conclusion, I don't hate NVL as a rule. I don't think it's pointless, and honestly, no, I don't think it's actually ruining RP on its own. I think it's a part of a whole and one that needs to remain in balance with the other rules that make up that DNA of an RP server. I do believe that right now it's enforced more heavily than others, and because of this, it's out of balance and having a negative effect on the entire scene. Change is possible in staff teams, even in rule sets, and has happened. Power gaming rules 5 years ago when I started RPing were much worse than they are now. They now include giving recourse and agency to your fellow roleplayers and are less focused on giving your own character major advantages. I would just like to see this view on NVL and views on consequence for character decisions to change too. It's already happened. The servers have NVL rules that include taking into account the life of another human being in your actions. To make meaningful changes, I would like to see how often we see guns in daily, even hourly interactions. To have rules applied more evenly and their consequences dealt with all of the information in mind. But this isn't something staff teams can do on their own. There are considerations that you make when you handle firearms. Yes, even criminals have them in real life, and maybe the weight is different, but it never goes away. Thanks for listening. Every server whose rules I did use, I will have links to in the description. Check them out, and happy RPing.